Sir, I think let's start now. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Uh, Good evening, everyone. I am delighted to have all of you here. I am Shyam Kumar, PhD student and Junior Research Fellow at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Today, I, along with my colleague Ashutosh, will be moderating the session. Now, Ashutosh will introduce himself.
Jai Hind, everyone. My name is Ashutosh Kumar Patel. I am currently doing my LLM from Tata Institute of Social Science, Mumbai, and I did my bachelor BA from Jamia Millia Islamia. So today I and Syam will moderate today's session. Thank you.
We welcome you all to the 7th Ambedkar International Summit 2024, organized to celebrate the life and legacy of Babasaheb Ambedkar on his 133rd birth anniversary. We are privileged to have Professor Khalid Anis Ansari. Professor Ansari is an associate professor of sociology at Azim Premji University in Bengaluru, India. He specializes in post-colonial modernity, democratic deepening, anti-caste movements, and transformative politics. He earned his PhD from University of Humanistic Studies, Netherlands, focusing on the conceptual interplay between pluralism, democracy, and internal minorities through a comprehensive examination of India's anti-caste Pasmanda Muslim movement. Professor Ansari has published and lectured widely in reputed academic and popular spaces. He collaborates as a research partner with a Sigma International Research Consortium, served as a visiting scholar at the South Asian Americans Leading Together, SALT, and contributes to the advisory board of Hindus for Human Rights. Today, he will be talking on the topic Babasaheb Ambedkar and Pasmanda Muslim Movement. Sir will be talking around half an hour and then we will have question answer session. Thank you so much. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Shyam and Ashutosh. And I'm especially honored to participate in the Ambedkar Intellectual Summit 2024 and celebrate Babasaheb Ambedkar's 133rd birth anniversary with my fellow Bahujans. So I will start with a feeling of regret that I discovered Babasaheb very late in my life, in my early 30s, when I was in Bihar around 2006 or 2007. That is when one of my friends, Ashok Yadav, he introduced his works, Castes in India, and I read that work in one night. After that, I read Annihilation of Caste, What Gandhi and Congress Did to the Untouchables, Pakistan or the Partition of India. And it completely changed the way I understood South Asia at that point of time. And 2006 was a very important phase in my life because I was working on a project in Patna around a Dargah Shah Arzam, where there were Valmiki communities and Bakho Muslim community there. So Bakhos were almost gypsies and Valmikis, they were Safai Karamcharis and so on. So that is where I was getting empirical experience of caste. And to read Babasaheb at the same time, it was a very personally, a very enlightening journey for me. That is where, in Patna also, that is where I met Ali Anwar, who is one of the main leaders of the Pasmanda lower caste Muslim movement. So all of these things were happening simultaneously around the same time. I think Babasaheb Ambedkar's writing, they have had a profound impact on the Pasmanda movement, on the Pasmanda discourse. And the lower caste Muslim experience, it played a very vital role in interpreting that and also in articulation of the movement. For me personally, I feel a great sense of gratitude and debt to Babasaheb's writings, because I would not have been the same person I was if I had not read him. So it's with that deep sense of gratitude that I feel for Babasaheb, and I want to say a bit on how Babasaheb's work influenced the Pasmanda journey and my own journey. And then I'll come to the present, because I see the anti-caste movement, anti-caste discourse, reaching a certain kind of a plateau with the kind of democratic challenges that we have faced in the last 20, 30 years. So the phase of anti-caste social justice politics that was inaugurated in the late 1980s with the impact of DS4, Manevar Kashiram, Behan Mayawati ji, BSP, and the entire mobilization around the Mandal movement. In the last few years, I think that phase, that spiral of social justice movement is facing a severe crisis at this moment. And I would say a bit on that from the Pasmanda lens, how we understand that crisis and what could be a way out. Not in the sense of offering concrete solutions, but at least identifying a few logics, trajectories that I think could be useful if the anti-caste discourse discusses and takes these concerns seriously. I will begin by a slightly longer quote from Babasaheb's work, Pakistan or the Partition of India, which is the second edition of Thoughts on Pakistan. It was published in 1946. I'll just read this extract. So Babasaheb says, "It seems to me that the reason for the absence of the spirit of change in the Indian Muslim or Muslim is to be sought in the peculiar position he occupies in India. He is placed in a social environment which is predominantly Hindu. It is this consciousness that he has to save himself from being submerged by the Hindus socially and politically, which to my mind is the primary cause why the Indian Muslims, as compared with their fellows outside, are backward in the matter of social reform. Their energies are directed to maintaining a constant struggle against the Hindus for seats and posts in which there is no time, no thought, and no room for questions relating to social reform. And if there is any, it is all overweighed and suppressed by the desire, generated by pressure of communal tension, to close the ranks and offer a united front to the menace of the Hindus and Hinduism by maintaining their socio-religious unity at any cost. The same is the explanation of the political stagnation in the Muslim community of India. Muslim politicians do not recognize secular categories of life as the basis of their politics, because to them, it means the weakening of the community in its fight against the Hindus. The poor Muslims will not join the poor Hindus to get justice from the rich. Why? The answer is simple. The poor Muslim sees that if he joins in the fight of the poor against the rich, he may be fighting against a rich Muslim. He is conscious that any injury to a rich Muslim, to a Muslim landlord, or to a Muslim mill owner is a disservice to the Muslim community, for it is thereby weakened in its struggle against the Hindu community. The dominating consideration with the Muslims is not democracy. The dominating consideration is how democracy with majority rule will affect the Muslims in their struggle against the Hindus. Will it strengthen them or will it weaken them? If democracy weakens them, they will not have democracy. The political and social stagnation in the Muslim community can be explained by one and only one reason. The Muslims think that the Hindus and Muslims must perpetually struggle. The Hindus to establish their dominance over the Muslims, and the Muslims to establish their historical position as the ruling community. That in this struggle, the strong will win, and to ensure strength, they must suppress or put in cold storage everything which causes dissension in their ranks. Now, this is a very remarkable text. It's a very clinical and succinct analysis of Muslim politics, which Babasaheb outlined in a very short extract in that book. And it brings to a sharp relief the question of contending religious nationalisms or competitive communalism, and how the mutual othering of politicized religious communities, that is Hindu and Muslim, has been instrumental in closing all opportunities of social reform within the minority Muslim community. In other words, Babasaheb burdens the majoritarian Hindu politics for the erosion of secular categories of life and democracy within Indian Muslims, and the prime reason why vertical solidarity within Muslims on religious lines has foreclosed all possibilities of horizontal solidarity on the basis of class and therefore emancipatory politics altogether. I would contend that this particular conceptual matrix, where categories like community, secularism, communalism, democracy, majority, minority, solidarity, and reform are arranged within the assumption of religious identity as being the overarching organizing principle, is being discursively destabilized by the narrative circulated by the Pasmanda movement. Those who are not familiar with the term Pasmanda or the Pasmanda movement, I'll just give a brief background. So Pasmanda is a Persian term, which means those that have fallen behind, and it includes three sections, three categories within. One is the backward Muslims, the second is the Dalit Muslims, and third are the Adivasi Muslims. So Pasmanda is a kind of an umbrella term that comprises these three categories, and it can be seen as analogical to the term Bahujan, which also includes the Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi communities. Pasmanda movement, which started in 1998 in Bihar by Ali Anwar. He's one of the major leaders of the Pasmanda movement. It challenges the hegemony of the Ashraf or privileged caste Muslims within Muslim politics and Muslim society. So it kind of introduces a radical negativity within the Muslim social space. And the Pasmandas, they can be characterized as the internal other in terms of power. So they are the internal others within the Muslim society in terms of power. They are marginalized, their representation is very low and so on. And in terms of numbers, they are a majority within the minority category because the population of Pasmanda is around 85% of the Indian Muslim population. Now I'll just quickly run through the 5 key moves that the Pasmanda discourse or the Pasmanda movement has made. And I see these 5 moves as responding to Babasaheb's critique of Muslim politics. So Babasaheb is absolutely spot on in that extract that I just read out. And how Pasmanda discourse is responding to that critique, it can be captured by these 5 moves. So the first move is that there is an attempt to transcend the trap of competitive religious nationalism by enacting a new social identity, the Pasmanda, and deconstructing the hegemonic nature of the majority-minority dyad by revealing that both sides of the binary are dominated by higher castes. Since the so-called Muslim politics is dominated by privileged caste Muslims who have socially humiliated and politically excluded the subordinated caste Muslims, there is little hope of empowerment for the latter within the minority rights discourse. The Pasmanda political subject, bivalent as it is informed by both religion and caste, is thus framed as the victim of both majoritarian and minoritarian politics and located outside the majority-minority dichotomy. For instance, Ali Anwar says, and I'll quote, Now the time is ripe for Pasmanda Muslims to craft their own identity. The identity of Pasmanda Muslims was hitherto obscured in the name of minority. Now we fear the word minority and feel that it is a fake or chalia word. That is the term that he uses. In the name of minority, either someone terrorizes us. So here the references to the privileged caste Hindus. So in the name of minority, either someone terrorizes us or someone snatches away our rights. That is the upper caste Muslims. In real terms, we are the majority Bahujan in this country. So that is the first move from the Pasmanda discourse. Secondly, the secular communal dyad is challenged. While secular politics is embraced as a desirable norm, there is the understanding that the actually existing secular politics is dominated by powerful caste groups. The inaugural issue of the Mahaz journal, Pasmanda Awaz, proclaims, secularism is not only our motto, but rather it is an article of faith for us. However, this initial enthusiasm subsides in other writings. So Ali Anwar says in another place, now to keep on reiterating secularism day in and day out won't do. One will also have to be democratic. Some people only know how to get our votes. Now they will have to learn to give us votes. In fact, there is a stress on the symbiotic relationship between majority and minority communalism, and the Pasmanda movement proposes to contest minoritarian fundamentalism from within in order to wage a decisive battle against majoritarian fundamentalism at the national level. As Waqar Hawari, a Pasmanda activist, puts it, while Muslim politicians like Imam Bukhari and Sayyid Shahabuddin add the Jodan, Jodan means the starter yogurt, it is left to the Hindu fundamentalists to prepare the yogurt of communalism. Both of them are responsible. We oppose the politics of both Hindu and Muslim fanaticism. There is also a realization that in most instances of communal or Islamophobic violence, it is the Pasmanda Muslims who mostly bear the brunt. Thirdly, there is an attempt to parochialize faith-based vertical social solidarities in favor of horizontal solidarities of caste groups across religions, based on a shared history of stigmatization and humiliation. The Pasmanda notion of solidarity is captured succinctly by the slogan, Dalit Pichda Ek Saman, Hindu Ho ya Musalman. Roughly, it can be translated as, all Dalit backwards are alike, whether they be Hindu or Muslim. As Ali Anwar says, there is a bond of pain between Pasmanda Dalit Muslims and the Pasmanda Dalit sections of other religions. This bond of pain is the supreme bond. We face the same issues. That is why we have to shake hands with the Dalit and Pasmanda sections of other religions. Fourthly, there is a stress on intra-group inequality in comparison to inter-group inequality, and a stress on bread and butter issues, as opposed to emotive issues like Babri, Muslim personal law, Urdu, AMU, and so on. So here there have been three moves by the Pasmanda discourse. One, they have challenged the neoliberal economic policies, which has a very negative influence on the artisans, on the unorganized sector workers, on the working class, the peasantry, which largely constitute the Pasmanda sections. So at one level, there is a strong critique against the neoliberal economic policies, which many Pasmanda feel are marginalizing them, alienating them economically. In terms of other government policies, there is a strong support for caste census, a strong demand of political representation within mainstream political parties in the parliaments and assemblies. And the data suggests that Pasmanda, for instance, in Lok Sabha, from 1st to 13th Lok Sabha, the population of Pasmanda is around 10% of India's population. Their representation has been only 0.8%. While the population of Ashraf or upper caste Muslims, whose population is around 2.01% of the national population, their representation has been 4.5%. So the upper caste Muslims have almost been doubly represented in the parliament and assemblies. So that is one strong critique from the Pasmanda section. The third is the contestation of quota. So one, the Pasmanda discourse has throughout challenged a communal quota for all Muslims. And they have articulated that upper caste Muslims, they have historically been the ruling class and they are well represented. So they should not be within the domain of reservations. While the Adivasi Muslims and the backward Muslims and the Dalit Muslims, they should have a certain strategy. So in that sense, within the OBC category, most Pasmanda Muslims are already covered. So there is a demand for sub-categorization at the national level for the OBC quota. As far as scheduled tribe is concerned, there is no religious bar. So OBC and scheduled tribe quota, they are religiously neutral. So there is a demand for recognition of certain castes like One Gujars, Bhil Muslims, Gond Muslims, so some Adivasi Muslims who have been left out. So there is a demand to include them. In the scheduled caste category, there is a demand to make the category religiously neutral and to include the Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians into the SC category. Because historically, because of the 1950 presidential order, clause 3, so the Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians are the only two categories within the Dalits that are excluded from the SC category, while Hindu, Buddhist, and Sikh Dalits, they are included. So those are the three demands in terms of the quota. And lastly, there is a realization that the community cannot be reformed unless the caste issue is addressed. Overall, broadly, Pasmanda politics has relied on transformative constitutionalism and democratic symbolism to attain its social justice goals, the deepening of existing affirmative action policies, adequate representation of Pasmanda Muslims in power, state support for cottage and small-scale industries, democratization of religious institutions and interpretative traditions, and so on. So this is what I have characterized as the post-minority politics in my work. So that was the brief sketch of the Pasmanda movement, how it is trying to democratize the Indian Muslim politics. And from that vantage point, it is directly connected to the other democratic struggles, to the larger Bahujan democratic struggle. And it seeks a solidarity, a pan-religious solidarity of lower caste and class for that purpose. Now, if we look at the contemporary anti-caste discourse from the Pasmanda lens, then there are three key concerns. If we have to reinvigorate the anti-caste movement and the democratic project, because democracy is not possible in India unless we have a strong anti-caste movement. And that strong anti-caste movement is not possible unless there is a broader Bahujan solidarity. Now, because of various changes in the political system, various changes at the global level and also at the national level in the last few years, one gets a feeling that the anti-caste movement is facing a severe crisis. And the Pasmanda movement is also a part of that movement, and so it also faces that crisis. And there are three interventions, three logics, in my view, that needs to be discussed. And I call them as the 3 Ds. So the first is decolonization of the anti-caste discourse. The second is democratization of the anti-caste discourse. And the third is diversification of the anti-caste discourse. And I'll quickly speak a bit on these 3 Ds, and then we can have a discussion. So the first, when we talk about decolonization, then there is a very strong orthodox view that caste is a Hindu phenomena, and Muslims and Christians, it's a derivative discourse. And if we have a strong Islamization or a strong Christianization, then Muslims and Christians would be able to transcend caste. So this is a very essentialist view. It is widely popular in anti-caste discourses. I won't go into the genealogy, but this is the orthodox view. Now, when we reflect on this view from the Pasmanda lens, then there are a few things that could be said. One, when we look at classical Islam itself, so any post-surplus society has some form of social stratification, has some form of hierarchy. And the classical Islamic society is not an exception. So even if we look at the classical Islamic society, the Arabian society at that time, it was much more egalitarian because there was a strong tribal content, because the Arabia in Prophet's time was a tribal society. And tribal societies, by virtue of their organization, they are more democratic, they are more egalitarian when compared to other strong agrarian societies. But still, even in that early society, there was some stratification and some form of hierarchy evident. When Islam moved to agrarian societies like South Asia, it articulated itself according to the local context. And if you look at the last 1,000 years of Islamic presence in South Asia and the literature, Islamic literature theology that is produced here, it is extremely casteist. From Ziauddin Burni's Fatwa Jahadari in the 14th century to the recent Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi's Beheshti Zevar, these are all very Manuwadi, very hierarchical, very casteist texts. So, and if you look at Islamization and Hinduization or Hindutva or Islamism, then who actually controls these discourses? So if Hindutva discourse is controlled by the Dvijas, then the Islamist discourse is actually controlled by the Ashraf sections within Muslims. So this notion that with increasing Islamization, caste can be eradicated within Muslim society, it is not borne out empirically, because the content of Islamization is extremely casteist, it's extremely hierarchical. So can we rethink some of these issues, and can we see caste as a mode of social stratification and ethnic group formation in South Asia that controls land, labor, power, sexuality, theological production, and all faith traditions here in South Asia as offering a legitimating vocabulary for caste stratification? So in that sense, can we rethink caste as a South Asian phenomena rather than a religious phenomena belonging to one particular tradition? Even when one may concede that because of the long durée nature of Hinduism, caste is probably much more intricately worked out in the Hindu Shastras. But even then, can we think and can we decolonize the anti-caste discourse in the sense that we see caste as a South Asian phenomena that is legitimized by almost all faith traditions, because all faith traditions, all theologies in South Asia, they are dominated by upper caste sections. So that is the first issue in terms of decolonization. The second issue is, and this is again informed by the Orientalist colonial view, where faith traditions are seen in a very strong connection with their origins. So Islam, while 50% of Muslims live on the east of Afghanistan, with very strong Muslim populations in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and Indonesia, and still the classical Islamic tradition is supposed to be the Arabian or West Asian tradition, the Middle East tradition, and the Islamic production in South Asia and Southeast Asia is supposed to be peripheral. So I would invoke Paul Gilroy's analytical distinction between routes that faith travel. So the routes that faiths travel, so Islam, for instance, coming from West Asia to South Asia and Southeast Asia, and the routes that they strike. So this, I think, is a very strong distinction. And if you look at some of the early writings, even Babasaheb Ambedkar, when he talks about conversion, so he gives a lot of reasons why one should not convert to, say, Christianity or Islam. But there is one reason that is striking. When he says, if the Dalits convert to Islam and Christianity, it will denationalize them. So what does denationalization mean here? That Muslims and Christians who are living here for 2000 years, 1000 years, still they are not officially legitimately included within the definition of nation. And why is that so? Is it because of this strong distinction between Indic religions and so-called foreign traditions? So I think this is something we need to think about, because religions are not only spiritual traditions, they are not only faith traditions, they are also knowledge traditions. And if we have a cosmopolitan, democratic attitude, if we can learn from John Dewey, if we can learn from Karl Marx, who are not obviously Indic scholars, what is the problem in learning or embracing Islam and Christianity? Why should one denationalize when one converts to these traditions? Does one denationalize when one becomes a Marxist? Does one denationalize if one learns from other scholars, Western scholars? So I think that those are the two key questions in terms of decolonization. One, this essentialist orthodox view that caste is broadly Hindu, and in Muslims and Christians, it's an aberration, it's a deviation. That is one. We need to have a strong discussion on that. And this strong connection of faith traditions with their origins. So those are the two important issues that we need to discuss. In terms of democratization, and this is a very important issue because it is very closely, intimately connected to the question of solidarity. So as I mentioned, Pasmanda Movement, it envisages a pan-religious solidarity of lower caste and classes, a solidarity of Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasis belonging to all traditions. So I still work with the term Bahujan, even when I feel that there is a strong sentiment now against this usage of the word Bahujan. But I still feel that Bahujan solidarity is absolutely essential for any democratic transformation in India. Bahujan solidarity, because of the principle of graded inequality, it is not easy. But which solidarity is? If you look at religious solidarity, so is the solidarity of all Hindus easy? Is the solidarities of all Muslims easy? Is the working class solidarity easy? Is the solidarity of women easy? So all kinds of social solidarities are difficult to achieve, but they must not be discarded as an operative principle. For the lower caste sections, I think the Bahujan term is a very important, essential term, and we need to organize around that term. And in order to achieve a strong Bahujan identity, I think it's time to talk about internal justice issues very openly and very strongly. Because SC category has around 1,200 castes, OBC has more than 2,500 castes, Muslim Pasmanda have around 700 caste groups. And because of the way the first past the post principle works in Indian democracy, it is extremely insensitive to those castes or jatis which have lower populations. So the first past the post principle, the kind of democracy that we have constructed, it's some communities which have larger significant populations, they are able to negotiate with this democracy better than micro communities which have very smaller numbers. So in that sense, with the increasing democratic deepening, with the increasing politicization of various communities, so everyone wants their share in power. And if the SC, ST, OBC category, if it is dominated, by a few numerically significant and politicized communities, that is going to be a problem. So I think we have to, as a Bahujan category, we have to take the demands of internal justice, sub-categorization within the SC, ST and OBC category seriously. And this slogan, "Jiski jitni sankhya bhari, uski utni zimmedari," it's a very important slogan. This slogan was very useful in the 90s when the Bahujan movement was growing. But this slogan also betrays an insensitivity to those Bahujan communities which have numerically insignificant populations. So the Pasmanda slogan, Pasmanda would give a spin to this slogan and they would say, "Jiski jitni sankhya bhari, uski utni zimmedari." So those which have larger populations within the Bahujan groups, it is their responsibility to ensure that those communities that are left out of the democratic game, they are included. So it's a responsibility on those Bahujan communities that have been able to negotiate with democratic politics better. And reservation policies is not about privileges. It is not about cornering a few benefits. Reservation policy also is very instrumental in shaping our identities. So in that sense, we have to ensure that these minor voices within the Bahujan community, they are given proper attention, they are brought to the table, brought to the conversation. And for instance, Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians, they have a long-standing demand of being included in the scheduled caste category. While many political parties in principle have supported this demand, still a couple of years back, when Supreme Court moved on this issue, I saw a few anti-caste thinkers with a very strong sentiment against this demand. My own sense is that if we don't listen to the internal voices, if we don't take the question of internal justice seriously, then it will open the field for elite capture of discourses and cooptation of these sections by the ruling elite. So it is a huge responsibility on slightly advanced Bahujan communities to ensure that the most marginalized communities within the Bahujan bloc, they are included within the anti-caste movement, given their proper share. And if that will happen, it will not weaken the Bahujan identity. It will make the Bahujan identity more stronger. It would make India much more democratic. The third D that I talk about is diversification. So far, the anti-caste discourse has privileged the experience, the caste-based experience of men, experience of people from a few caste groups, numerically significant caste groups. But I think this caste-based experience within the anti-caste discourse, this has to be broadened to include the experience of lower caste across religions, regions, genders, sexualities, classes, and linguistic groups. There's a very strong middle class content at this point of time for obvious reasons. And that is why the concerns of 85% of Bahujans, which are largely farmers, peasants, unorganized sector workers, artisans, the unorganized sector workers, and so on, their concerns are not being vigorously brought to the table. Most of the concerns that the anti-caste discourse is now focusing is on the middle class concerns. I mean, that is obvious because most of the articulation comes from middle class, the upwardly mobile groups within the Bahujan sections. But can we bring in the experience of these other groups within the Bahujan community and diversify the anti-caste experience? I'll just give one example. For example, there's a recent volume was published last year, Dalits in the New Millennium. It was edited by Sudha Pai, published by Cambridge. There are a number of essays in that book. It talks about the experience of Dalits, their challenges in the new millennium. but there is not even a single entry by any Dalit Muslim or by a Dalit Christian. So I think those are the few instances we need to think about: decolonize the anti-caste discourse, democratize the anti-caste discourse, and diversify the anti-caste discourse. So I'll stop here, and we can discuss it further during the interactive session. Anything that you would like to discuss? Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us with the session. Now, I would like to request Ashutosh to please summarize the session.
Yes. So I would like to thank Khalid sir to have an interactive session on the Babasaheb Ambedkar and Pasmanda Muslims. So firstly, they have discussed about the Manevar Kasiram movement and Bahanji movements, which was prevalent during in 1990s. And they have also talked about the terms of Pasmanda, like backward, the Dalits and Adivasi Muslims, which are included in the Pasmanda community. And another things they have talked about the movements of Pasmanda which are started in 1998 in Bihar, which challenges the Ashraf community dominance within the Muslims community. So they also talked about 5 key moves of the Pasmanda community, like attempt to transnationalism by majority versus minority, and secular communal politics which challenges during that period of time. And another was the Dalit Pichda Ek Saman, whether Hindus and Muslims. And they have also talked about the 3 moves which were challenged by the Pasmanda community. Like first was the challenges new liberal socio-economic policies, denial of caste census representations in legislative bodies and other sectors. And third was the contestation of quota, like subcategorization and including those people who have very less number of population within the Pasmanda community. And they have also talked about the 3D 3D anti-caste movement, like decolonization, democratization, diversification of anti-caste discourse. In decolonization, they talked about the how Dwisas and Ashraf in Muslims actually controls the whole like socio-economic discourse of our society. In caste, which as a they also talked about the history of the decolonize, like how the like Pasmanda community prevailed, like how the caste system came into Muslims religion. So another one they talked about denationalization, uh, democratization of the anti-caste movement. So they talked about internal justice like subcategorization, and another quota for the special Muslims community. And within that they have said that जिसकी जितनी संख्या भारी जिसकी उतनी जिम्मेदारी. And the last thing they talked about the diversification of anti-caste discourse, like how everyone should be included into the process making uh, within the Muslims community. So these were the things which they talked about. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. Now the floor is open for the question and answer session. So if anyone has any question, please go and ask the question.
Hello, Kanchan's here.
Yes.
Yeah, sir, I had one doubt. In the decolonization part, you said while Babasaheb were asked that why he didn't convert to what Muslim, Islam, or Christianity. So you said it will denationalize. So what are your point of view on this? Why?
No, I didn't say that it will. This is one of Babasaheb's arguments. So,
Yes.
so for instance, there are a number of other reasons that he gives why he chooses Buddhism and not other faiths for conversion. So, but one of the reasons that he gives for not converting to Islam and Christianity uh, is that it would probably denationalize the Dalits. Uh, so again, I'm trying to make sense of why is this term denationalization being used and what it means. So, I mean, in the recent debate, if you recall, I don't know whether you are aware or whether you engage with the debate. So one of the reasons against the inclusion of Dalits and Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians in the SC category was that they do not belong to Indic faith traditions. They belong to foreign traditions or Abrahamic traditions and so on. Now, how that plays out, why that is important, those are the questions that we need to think about. So why is the external origin of a faith tradition influential in their being kept away from a reservation category like the SC? For instance, does the Constitution discriminate among citizens on the basis of the ideas that they have or on the basis of the faiths that they practice? Is that the constitutional view? So those are the kind of things that we need to think about. So yeah, so that is the only thing. I'm not saying that I said that. It is Babasaheb's own
No.
argument. Yeah.
Yeah. I understood that, sir. That was Babasaheb's. That was the sentence of Babasaheb only.
Yeah.
I think when at Wardha, where when he was asked, I think it is in 1935 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to ask, there must be some reason to why Babasaheb said like that. So I
So that is
am
what
not
I'm
aware
saying. I
about.
mean, so that is what I'm saying. So there was a strong influence on all the major nationalist thinkers at that point of time of the Orientalist and colonial discourse. So this notion of faith being associated with their origins, with their geographical, territorial origins. So it is not Babasaheb who is to blame for that. I mean, at that point of time, the British colonial historiography and British colonial sociology, uh, so they usually associated faith traditions with their origins. I'm saying it's not only Babasaheb. If you look at even the Article 25B in the Constitution, then it defines the Hindu negatively. So there is no positive definition of the Hindu. Hindu is someone who is not a Muslim, Christian, Parsi, or Jew, right? So that is the definition of Hindu that is also there in the Constitution. So again, how is the Hindu being defined? So the Hindu is being defined in opposition to four faith traditions: Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrianism. And all these four faith traditions, they are so-called foreign faith traditions. I mean, their origins, they lie in West Asia, right? And so when you look at this definition, then Hindu includes the Buddhist and Jains and Sikhs, all Indic traditions, so-called Indic traditions, as legal Hindus. So all these four, Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism, and all the other traditions also, which are so-called Indic, they are included within the category Hindu, right? So I'm just saying that there is a very strong influence of the colonial Orientalist historiography and knowledge system on how we understand faith traditions. And one of the important element is the strong association of faith traditions with their origins. I'm saying this is not applied to other secular knowledge systems. Say, for example, Marxism or or even Nazism. So, for instance, the RSS, it learns from the Nazi philosophy, which is again a German German philosophical tradition, right? We have no objections to learning from Karl Marx or other secular thinkers. But why is this strong sense of distinction between faiths which have origins outside and which have Indic origins? I think this is something we need to work with.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
So one person raised his hand to kindly ask questions. Rajendra Kashyap.
Dr. Ansari, my question to you is that when we talk of Pasmanda, Muslim as well as Dalit Christian, vis-a-vis Dalits which are there in Hinduism or Buddhism or Sikhism and so on, you cannot discount the power of cultural capital and power of religion as a unifying factor. If the communities only have to come together to say have some political power, and when the possibility of that political power coming to you is remote or less, then that unity is dissipated. So what kind of communities we will build without having a common cultural heritage, a common say belief system, which otherwise brings unity of amongst the community? We know that there are inequalities in community. One can be rich, other can be poor, one can be tall, one could be small, one could be thin, other could be fat. That kind of inequalities we very well know, and also in communities that kind of disparities will prevail. But the power of having a common culture, having a unified religion which brings all of them together, is do you foresee any kind of say possibility in coming time in Indian subcontinent? That is my question.
So I would say, I mean, there are two things. So I recall Mahatma Jyotiba Phule's somewhere he said that for him the ideal family would be where the head of the family is a Satyashodak, the son may be a Muslim, the daughter may be a Christian, uh, and they can all eat together in the same dining table. So again, we have to think hard on what kind of a society we need to build. Now, I would make a distinction between religion and culture, right? So, I mean, South Asia, we have common cultures. So if you go and in culture, language is a very important part. Most Dalit Bahujans, they live in contiguous localities. So if you go to Bihar, for instance, I talked about my experience of Patna. So the Bakho Muslims, they live with the Valmiki Hindus, or if you don't prefer the term, whatever, the Valmikis and the Bakhos, they live together. So in terms of class, and there is a strong correlation between class and caste, so most marginalized sections would be lower caste across religions. And because of the very fact of marginalization, they usually live in common neighborhoods or in contiguous spaces, live close to each other. They have similar experiences of injustice, similar experiences of economic marginalization, unemployment, adverse schooling, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a complicated question to say that we need to have a unifying religion. I'm not sure how to respond to that. Why should we have a unifying religion? To have some common sense of purpose. We can have different religions and still come together as people on common issues, on common concerns. So this strong notion of a common culture, it's a very statist, a nation statist thinking. So this notion that we need a nation can only be formed because of a uniform culture, one nation, one language, one religion. I think that kind of imagination is very undemocratic. And with the increasing changes at the global level and also the way cultural exchange is there because of media and so on, we need to learn to live together with difference. So I think there are two important categories. One is to create societies which are as free as possible, where we embrace as much diversity as possible. And the second, we create societies where we continue to fight inequalities consistently. So I think those are the two important questions. And if as a people, we can come together to fight unfreedoms and fight inequalities, I think that project is enough for us to come as a people, come together as a people, despite having differences of language, despite having differences of religion, despite having differences of cultures and so on. So I think this to create a unifying, unificatory, a very strong scientific kind of unification, scientific kind of commonality. I think that is very undemocratic. What we need to come up with are some broad principles, are some broad notions of solidarity, and work with that on common issues, on common concerns. So that would be my very brief view on that.
So now there are few questions in comment section. So first question is is work board provision is Ashraf phenomenon?
Work board is a juristic thing. I mean, the most of the work boards, Urdu academies, Aligarh Muslim University, Jamia Millia Islamia, All India Muslim Personal Law Board, All India Muslim Majlis Mashawarat, Jamaat Islami, Popular Front of India, all these Muslim organizations are dominated by Ashrafs. All the organizations that are Islamic community organizations, or all the organizations that work for the minorities or Muslims, they're dominated by the elite Ashraf classes.
Okay. So next question is, when you refer decolonize, what or who has colonized the anti-caste discourse?
So when I am talking about decolonization of the anti-caste discourse, I'm saying our early thinkers, they had access to resources. For instance, take Savarkar, for instance. So Savarkar, yeah, and if you look at that 17th century, what's his name? So this term of Punya Bhumi and Pitra Bhumi, that was used by William Jones in the late 18th century. And then Savarkar weaponizes that. So most of our nationalist thinkers, they were reading texts which were available at that point of time. So if one had to read Indian history, you would read James Mill, you would read Elphinstone, you would read, if you have to read European discussions on nationalism, you would read Ernest Renan, and so on and so forth. So the texts that were available at that point of time on history, on Indian sociology, they were largely influenced by the Orientalist colonial discourse. And in that sense, it's not about the anti-caste discourse. The general discussions, for instance, take two questions. Take 800 years of Muslim rule and Islam as a religion, right? So if you read the early thinkers, you'll find either very Islamophobic views or very Islamophilic views, right? So among most early nationalist thinkers, and it is because of the sources they are using at that point of time. Now, after 70 years, revisionist historiography is there. A lot of things have changed over the last 70 years. Scholarship has moved ahead, and we are now, as historians, as social scientists, which are now much more aware of how the Orientalist colonialist discourse influenced our early thinkers on our understanding of Indian society. So in that sense, I'm using the term decolonization. So there is an imprint of the colonial knowledge system in all nationalist thinkers, including many anti-caste thinkers.
Sir, as you talked about the conversion of the Babasaheb to different religion. So one person's asking the questions about whether they want to associate with caste or they prioritize religion more than the caste?
So again, faith is a complicated question. For instance, when Babasaheb converts to Buddhism, he doesn't convert to the existing Buddhist tradition. For instance, so he he writes Buddha and his Dhamma and Navayana Buddhism. So it's a exercise in liberation theology where he interprets Buddhism from the vantage point of liberty, equality, and fraternity, right? So again, when you say that Babasaheb converts to Buddhism, it's a Buddhist liberation theology that he articulated through Buddha and his Dhamma. I think that liberation theology is available in all religious traditions. For example, in Islam, there is a strong liberation theology tradition. In South Africa, there is a thinker called Farid Isaac, who is an Islamic liberation theologian. Ali Shariti of Iran, he has interpreted Islam from the vantage point of liberal, modernist, democratic values. Among Christianity, there is a strong liberation theology tradition. Increasingly, even in Hinduism, in 2013, Anand Nath Rambachan, who is a theologian from Fiji, whose family went as indentured labor during the colonial time. He now teaches in a Western university, in a US university. He has written this book, Hindu Theology of Liberation. So, I mean, that if you look at religions, you cannot understand them only in the abstract. Religions also interact with political economy, with the state. So while Buddhism may be a peaceful tradition, but if you go to Sri Lanka, if you go to Myanmar, if you go to Japan, you would find very right-wing interpretations of Buddhism, very violent interpretations of Buddhism. Similarly, Christianity may be about love, but 2 world wars happened in Europe, were started in Europe, which were largely Christians. Similarly, Islam may talk about brotherhood, but in slavery in Islam, it was abandoned. It was rejected only after the Moroccan Declaration of 1922, right? So despite all talk of equality, slavery continued in Islam till 1922. So in that sense, you have to understand that religions interact, religions are interpreted, they are not essentialist, they are not objective, they change with time depending on who is interpreting them, who is dominating the religious institutions, who does the religious hermeneutics, and so on and so forth. So I'm saying if I have a problem with a tradition, one has the full right to exit that tradition. And that is what democracy is all about. So in that sense, if Babasaheb feels that Hinduism is a exploitative tradition, and if he opted to move out of Hinduism to Buddhism, and not only to Buddhism, but his own interpretation of Buddhism, which is Navayana Buddhism. So he's completely, I mean, one should respect that choice. And it's a very democratic choice. But one should recall that it's a very complicated tradition because religion speaks to our fundamental existential dilemmas of birth and death and the mysteries of life. People have a very emotional connection with religion. Even Babasaheb took around 20 years to announce his decision. While he made his first announcement in 1934 that he was born a Hindu, but he will not die a Hindu. But from 1934 to 1956, he took a lot of time to think about these issues, to reflect on these issues, and then he made a very informed judgment. So I think we should not rush with religion and we should be careful the way Babasaheb was.
Okay, sir. So now I would like to invite Syam to conclude the session and vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Ashutosh. Now moving on to the vote of thanks. We would like to thank all of you for attending the session. Your active engagement and participation made the session informative and enlightening. We would also like to thank Magneshwar, Swapnil, and their team for providing us with the opportunity. Thank you once again. Thank you so much, everyone. We are looking forward to see you in the next session. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for having me.